The old mechanic wiped the grease from his calloused hands, the day's work still clinging to him in the form of oil stains and the smell of gasoline. He had spent most of his life fixing cars no one else would bother with, beat-up trucks, rusted sedans, engines that coughed like old men. People came to him because they couldn't afford anyone else, and he never turned them away, even when they paid with nothing more than gratitude and home-cooked meals. That evening, as he locked up his garage, he noticed a frail little girl sitting quietly on the steps outside. She was no more than 8 years old, her skin pale, her breath shallow, and her small hands clutched tightly around a worn teddy bear missing one eye. The mechanic bent down, his voice rough but gentle. "You lost, sweetheart?" he asked. The girl shook her head slowly and whispered, "No, sir. I'm waiting." He frowned, confused, but before he could ask more, she winced, placing a hand against her chest. Without thinking, he scooped her into his arms, startled by how light she felt, almost weightless like a bundle of feathers. "If you carry me up the stairs," she whispered against his ear, her voice fragile yet certain, "I'll tell you a secret." Her words pierced the air with a strange urgency that made his heart tighten. He didn't know who she was or why she was there, but something in her eyes, wide, fragile, yet filled with a quiet strength, made him nod without hesitation. The old mechanic, who had carried engines heavier than his own regrets, now found himself carrying something far more delicate, a sick child whose secret was waiting at the top of the stairs. The stairs she meant were not far, just a narrow flight leading up to the small apartments above his garage. His knees ached with every step, but he held her carefully, afraid she might break if he wasn't gentle enough. Her teddy bear dangled from her thin arm, bumping against his chest as they climbed. At the top, he set her down softly on an old wooden chair outside his door. She smiled faintly, as though the climb itself had been a victory. "You're stronger than you look," she teased, her voice barely more than a whisper. The mechanic chuckled, though inside he felt a pang of worry. This little girl was fighting something far bigger than her small body could handle. "Now, about that secret," he said, crouching so his weary eyes met hers. She looked around as if making sure no one else was listening, then leaned forward, her tiny hand brushing his rough cheek. "My mama used to tell me," she began softly, "that people like you, people who help others without asking for anything, are angels in disguise. She said if I ever found one, I should tell them so they'd believe it too." The mechanic froze, the weight of her words pressing harder than any engine block he'd ever lifted. No one had ever called him anything close to an angel. He had lived alone for years, convinced his life was nothing more than oil, wrenches, and long nights. And yet, this fragile child, a stranger, was looking at him with trust, as though she had found something sacred in him that he had never dared to see in himself. For a long moment, the mechanic didn't know how to respond. His throat tightened, and he cleared it roughly, pretending to adjust his cap. "Angel, huh? Guess I don't fit the part," he muttered, his voice low. The girl only smiled, weak but unwavering. "Sometimes angels look tired. Sometimes they smell like gasoline. But they still shine." Her words sliced through the silence like sunlight cracking open a dark room. He sat back on his heels, staring at her in wonder. All his life, he had been invisible, just the man in the greasy overalls, fixing what others threw away. He had been dismissed, overlooked, even pitied. And yet here was this sick little girl, giving him a title that felt impossibly pure. She reached into the pocket of her faded dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper, its edges frayed. "This is my second secret," she whispered, pressing it into his hand. "But don't read it until I can't come back anymore." The mechanic stared at the fragile note, his rough hands trembling as he took it. He wanted to ask what she meant, but before he could, her body swayed. He caught her just in time, her head resting against his shoulder. He carried her inside, laying her gently on the old couch by the window, the same couch where he sometimes napped between jobs. For the first time in years, he wished his home looked warmer, softer, more welcoming, for her. She clutched her teddy tightly and whispered, "Can I rest here a while?" His chest ached, and all he could say was, "As long as you need, sweetheart. As long as you need." The days that followed wove themselves into a quiet rhythm neither of them expected. The little girl returned often, sometimes with a faint smile, sometimes with tears she tried to hide. The mechanic never asked too many questions, he simply let her sit in the garage as he worked, handing him wrenches with her tiny hands, humming songs that softened the noise of clanking tools. Neighbors began to notice her visits, whispering that the gruff old man seemed lighter somehow, as if the weight he had carried for years was slowly being lifted by the presence of a child who had so little yet gave so much. One rainy evening, she appeared weaker than usual, her breath ragged, her face pale. The mechanic rushed to her side, his heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt since his youth. "You should be resting, not climbing all those stairs," he scolded gently, though his hands trembled as he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She looked up at him with eyes too wise for her age and whispered, "I wanted to see my angel again, before it gets harder." His chest tightened painfully. He wanted to tell her she would get better, that doctors could fix whatever was wrong, but the truth lingered unspoken between them. Instead, he sat beside her, his large hand covering her frail one. For the first time in years, he prayed silently, not for himself, but for her. In that moment, the grease-stained garage transformed into something sacred, a place where kindness stitched together two broken souls, one old and weary, the other young and fragile, both clinging to the quiet miracle of being seen. One night, long after the rain had stopped tapping against the windows, the little girl fell asleep on the couch, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. The mechanic sat nearby, the folded note she had given him still burning a hole in his pocket. His rough fingers hovered over it, torn between obeying her wish and the aching need to know what she had written. Hours passed before he finally unfolded the fragile paper under the dim lamp. The handwriting was shaky but careful. "Dear angel, when I can't come back anymore, please don't be sad. You fixed more than cars, you fixed me. You gave me a place where I wasn't sick, just a little girl helping her friend. Thank you for carrying me when I couldn't climb alone. If you ever feel lonely, just remember, someone in the world already loves you." The words blurred as tears filled his tired eyes, the first he had shed in decades. He clutched the note to his chest, whispering a promise to her sleeping form. "You'll never be forgotten, sweetheart. Never." When morning came, she was weaker still, and though she tried to smile, he knew her visits were nearing their end. Yet even in her fading strength, she managed to place her small hand over his and say, "Don't stop being who you are. The world needs angels, even if they don't believe they are one." Those words carved themselves deep into his heart, a truth he had never imagined carrying. When she no longer came, the garage felt unbearably silent. Every creak of the stairs reminded him of her soft laughter, every empty chair a reminder of the weight he once carried in his arms. The mechanic kept her teddy bear on the counter, its missing eye watching over him as he worked. The folded note, now worn from being opened countless times, stayed in his breast pocket like armor. Weeks later, a woman appeared at the shop door, her mother. With tears in her eyes, she thanked him for the kindness he had shown her daughter, explaining how much those moments had meant in the little girl's final days. He said nothing, only nodded, unable to trust his voice. But after she left, he looked around his garage and realized it was no longer just a place of grease and broken machines. It had become a sanctuary of memories, of lessons etched by a child who carried more courage than most grown men. From that day forward, he fixed every car with the same patience and care, not for money but for love, telling himself that maybe someone, somewhere, needed an angel in disguise. And sometimes, when the evening light slanted through the dusty window, he swore he could hear her faint whisper, "If you carry someone up the stairs, they might just carry you farther than you ever dreamed." The mechanic smiled through tears, his heart no longer heavy with loneliness but lifted by the secret she had given him, that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to heal wounds far deeper than his own. And so he lived, not just as a mechanic, but as a reminder of her love.